From beanies to carry bags and from shoes to caps, browse our shop now at tntradio.live. TNT Radio. This is Connecting the Dots with Matt Arrett on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, welcome back for our third segment of Connecting the Dots, where I'm very happy to be joined by a good friend, David Gosselin, who is somebody I've been working with now since 2009. And David has maintained an incredible array of platforms that he's brought online in recent years. He writes on Substack's New Lyre, so people can Google New Lyre on Substack, Age of the Muses. Two fantastic resources. He has the Chained Muse website, chainedmuse.com, newlyre.com. These are quarterlies that people could subscribe to. David, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Great.
Long time.
And we're going to talk about some social engineering, a lot of history, some culture, and I figured a word of something more subjective might be a good place to start. Why is it that you felt that it would be an important thing to do to create such things as platforms that would revive classical composition in poetry and the arts, which is, I think, the core focus of your work with the New Lyre and the Chained Muse? Why would this be an important thing, and why is this such? Because I believe it is. You sold me on it, but why did you choose to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all enjoy going down rabbit holes, right? And we like to know what's going on out there. And at a certain point, we realize it's not all just nice things. There's a lot of dark things and whatnot. But I think we all know that there's the saying that if you stare into the abyss for too long, it stares back. So yeah, we do need to know what's happening in the world, but not to the point that it eclipses the deeper thing inside human beings, right? That divine spark, that creative spark that is at the source of all the good things that humanity has been able to accomplish. And we need to be able to celebrate those and rediscover them, right? They always have to be rediscovered with each new generation, and to build on those traditions. So I think that's ultimately any sort of real opposition to evil requires genuine creativity and goodness today, right?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good way of putting it, very quickly and succinctly, that we lack a sense of beauty and goodness that are tied together. And as such, would you say that the lack of that sensibility within our culture has made people more prone to believing or not discerning when they see lies or sophistry that convince them that evil is good or lies are true? Do you think there's a connection between that aesthetic sense?
Right. Yeah. One could argue that, and many people have, right, that an aesthetic notion of goodness and beauty and truth is actually the highest sort of moral level, right? Such that, we don't just do things because it's a sort of Kantian duty, like, don't do this, and like, you have to do the right thing, right? And there's a lot of that, even if well-intentioned, but it's that you do good because you want to do good. You do beautiful things because it's beautiful to do beautiful things, as MLK said in one of his speeches, right? So this idea that we're doing things because it's a beautiful thing to do, and we're human beings and we can tap into that transcendent realm, right? And sort of beautify, whether, as Schiller talks about, beautify our instincts, beautify our ideas, our actions, right? And art is sort of a pinnacle of that, right? That everything is sort of brought to a level of perfection, and we can imitate that, right? Or art can imitate us, right? There's always this interplay. So
well, you brought up yeah, and you brought up Schiller, and how Schiller is somebody who also is very close to my heart too, as a poet and a playwright, but also somebody who is a moral revolutionary, somebody who is really working to change society for the better and create citizens. And he had a very strong sense of the role of certain types of art that could either make more powerful sovereign citizens as a consequence of their experience with art, or worse citizens who are less capable of self-government forming judgments. Could you say a little bit something about these two different types of arts that Schiller warned about, or the two types of states of mind and heart of the artist per se, that is the creator of said arts, that could produce either better or worse people?
Yeah, well, I mean, I like to think of art, it's really, and I mean, in terms of having read a lot of Schiller, it's inspired this idea that art is really the middle world, if you will, the bridge between the heart and the mind. And art allows us to be playful, right? To play around with ideas, to experiment and to test our own ideas and axioms, which I would argue is what is classical Greek tragedy, or what is tragedy for Shakespeare and all the great playwrights. You're playing things out on the stage of people's imagination, and you're giving them an ability to have a visceral experience of what goodness looks like, of what beauty looks like, and what stupidity and evil looks like too, right? So to make these things real for people, such that they're not just abstractions, I think that's really one of the main goals of great art, and to therefore give people the degrees of freedom in their imagination to also be playful with themselves, to challenge themselves, in a way that if you're just sort of following a rule book, no matter how good your rule book is, in real life, it's only going to be so useful if you don't have a bit of playfulness, a sense of humor, but also a sense of foresight. Like, I've seen this movie before, right? Sometimes we're in situations like, yeah, that would be a really bad idea if, like, I went down that alley or whatever it is, right? So
Right.
art is there to find us. Robert Frost said that poetry serves as a reminder of those things that it would impoverish us to forget. And I think that's really where art plays this invaluable role in our lives.
Yeah, like, why actually go through every single error possible in life and make every bad decision before you learned, oh, I maybe shouldn't have done that, when you could live through and make those experiences in a more healthy way without damaging yourself or others through the process of theater as a medium that allows you to vicariously play it out, as you said, in that state of the imagination, and that also has bearing and weight upon our moral development and our conscience and understanding what would be the consequence of very bad decisions. So that's I think a very good point you wage, or that you bring to the table there. Is this what Schiller gets at as well? And I don't know if there's other similar philosophers and artists who describe the universal sentiments as being something which is more than the simple feelings that we have that anything can give us, as far as art, horror movies or Friends on TV. We get feelings of pleasure or horror or fear, but the universal sentiments are something more than that lower category of basic feelings.
Right. I mean, yeah, well, that's a big issue, and I'd say with a lot of modern art and popular entertainment, where you basically have a formalization, a distillation of formulas, things that have worked, that you'll find, all the greatest poets and artists using as devices, right? Creative metaphor, all sorts of different, time reversal, play around with time, future, past, and, the reveal turns out, oh my God, that person's actually that, or, oh no. But so, and then it becomes all banalized, right? You get like the melodramas, or you get a lot of these popular shows that, yeah, they make you feel something in the moment, but that's really it, right? It's a formula for how do you get people to emote and to feel something. But yeah, is art just about feeling? If we look at the greatest art, there's a feeling, but feelings also lead to thoughts. If in serious art, it awakens something in you, right? When you feel things you haven't felt before, it can lead to new insights. But if you just reduce that to entertainment, right? It becomes a distraction, becomes an escape, right? So we very much have today this culture of escapism, and art, the music especially, right? They're altered states. It's like you get to tap out for like 3 minutes or something. You're driving and you're hearing whatever, Lady Gaga, The Weeknd, or all these things, and yeah, obviously it it titillates the senses. If somebody's going to say, yeah, no, that's not a catchy song, they're lying. I mean, these songs are made to like stick in the psyche, in the head. And so yeah, people get used to that. So the experience of art becomes like a drug, right? It becomes this like little high. But then you're left kind of, you're back to reality, and actually you feel it's just this in and out thing. We're breaking in and out of illusions, out of these altered states. But is that the real thing, right? Is that like what we get in Shakespeare or Beethoven or Dante or Homer? Right? I think there's a little more going on.
Mm-hmm. You've recently written a series of reports dealing with the question of from trance to transcendence, which I found very, very impressive. And you've been dealing with this and treating this topic for quite some time. The role, the political, social engineering dynamic of the things we are told are our culture, that we were born into, that we should embrace and adapt to. As far as Lady Gaga, whatever's popular now is naturally popular because it's just the sum total of the demand for those sorts of gratifications that manifest in these pop arts or whatever else. But you make the point that there's something that is often left out of this popular narrative that deals with intention to create banality and addiction to ephemeral escapism. And you just alluded to it just now. Could you say a little bit more? How does this work? How is it that things like Lady Gaga or the pop music culture are tied to operations that Aldous Huxley was a part of? Or I remember Bertrand Russell has a famous quote where he says, the social engineers of the future will discover that repeated tones given to kids below the age of like 10 will be very effective at conditioning them and getting them to mold themselves to whatever tastes are demanded of them by the tyrants of the future who would be advised by the social engineers. Could you say a little bit about that before? And we're going to stop in 4 minutes, go to a break, and then we're going to come back and really pull on this a lot more.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of creepy stuff out there. If we get down to it, you look at if you look at the lyrics for a lot of these pop songs, right, it's very different than the feeling, right? If you just think about like the music and the melody, they're very sort of hypnotic and rapturous, catchy. But then you read the lyrics, and there's often this dissonance, right? Like the things that are being promoted. I mean, I just heard one at McDonald's, and it sounded like it's just a song, but it sounded like, this is like 16-year-old girls listening to this. It's a young lady singing, and she's been a good girl for most of her life. Now she just wants to go crazy. So something like that, right? But like, I just want to let loose and blah, blah, blah. But you think, okay, whatever. But again, music is often aimed at young people, right? If we look at historically what was the Woodstock and the 1960s rock, drug, sex counterculture, this is really they're paradigms that are sort of foreshadowing. They're demonstrating trends, right? But it's like the Gallup poll effect, right? It's opinion polls that say this is what people like, this is what people think. So supposedly we're being given information about trends, but really that it's shaping the trend. It's telling us what people think, and it's tapping into people's their automatic motivations, the group think, right? Appealing to the group, the tribal instinct. So same way these songs are they're tapping into in different ways, different feelings that people have, sort of making them fun, right? If you hear lyrics, the Doors and stuff, like if you read a lot of these lyrics, it's crazy stuff, but it makes it fun. It makes it sound. So there's this split, and I think it's interesting when we pay more attention, right? It's hard to unhear or to unsee things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's the thing. It's a multifaceted attack upon the sensibilities of human citizens who would normally be developing mature faculties of reason, of judgment, of sovereign thinking that would allow us to self-govern, to decide from amongst ourselves who would be our representative, what would be our policies, what will be our future trajectories. These are, if you're going to have any type of sovereign governments or a free society, that's a precondition to have those powers intact. So to be able to take what you just said and recognize that there has been actually an effort to corrupt both by banalizing our emotions into numbness for small bursts of pleasure that we always seek more of, or also to take that banality of mindlessness and then infuse messaging, as we hear with a lot of the Lady Gaga lyrics, or even, as you mentioned, when you read the writings of the Door lyrics, the lyrics from Jim Morrison, or even the Beatles sometimes, like Bang Bang Maxwell's Silver Hammer from the Beatles. There's some sociopathic evil stuff being consciously put in under our radar, into our psyche, especially for young people who are the focus target audience. Very important. And we're going to pull on this a little bit more after a commercial break on TNT Radio.
TNT Radio's Chris Smith.
Despite being used to protect travellers from terrorists, hijackers, or violent drunks, or those who were drugged out as they board, and this has been going on since 1961, they won't be around this Thanksgiving. None of them. Air marshals were always meant to be invisible. Well, you can guarantee that this Thanksgiving. Ironically, the Biden administration has been hijacking air marshals for all kinds of other duties, leaving the passengers they were meant to guard and protect completely helpless. Air marshals have been lumbered with assisting the chaos on the southern border. They might be called air marshals, but an unknown number are now seconded to work on the ground. Maybe they're ground marshals now, marshalling illegal immigrants on the border and doing the job supposedly meant for the United States Customs and Border Protection. Where are they?
Chris Smith on TNT Radio.
I didn't ask to be thrown in the streets with nowhere to go. I didn't think I'd survive. But I did ask for help, and Covenant House was there for me.
1 in 10 young adults will experience a form of homelessness this year. For these kids who didn't ask to be put in this unthinkable situation, Covenant House is there.
Covenant House helped me break the cycle of homelessness in my family. They gave me the love that I needed.
Over 2,000 young people will sleep safely in a Covenant House bed tonight. When youth who are experiencing homelessness have a hot meal, a safe place to sleep, medical care, and love, they can overcome heartbreaking challenges and have a brighter future.
They just really genuinely just wanted to help me succeed, and I'm succeeding. I'm a speaker, I'm an author. Covenant House really helped me and really helped mold me into the woman I am today.
If you or someone you love is asking for help, go to safeplacetosleep.org today.
CO2 sustains all life on Earth, but now it's in long-term decline. We face the return of an ice age. We mandate that the truth be told. Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, we're back with the second segment of Connecting the Dots in the third hour on TNTRadio.live. This is Matthew Ehret. I'm here with David Gosselin, poet, essayist, social commentator, and a lot more. But David, we were talking a little bit about the decay, the corruption by design, the systematic design of corruption in the arts, in the music especially, in the poetry. That has resulted in people losing grasp of their human faculties, their ability to form mature judgments that have morality and reason working together as proper citizens must. Now, recently you wrote a paper that you published called Meet the Artists Behind the Artists. And in it, you go through a few very interesting anomalies dealing with certain things known as the liminal collective, run by people who are very closely tied to the World Economic Forum, who train global young leaders in creativity. But then you also tie that into something a little bit darker as well, going into the historic evolution of rock and roll, with certain big, beloved musicians who are a big part of the baby boomer psyche. But first of all, what is the liminal collective? What is this thing that has been shaping and influencing modern pop artists like Lady Gaga? And why should we be looking at this?
Okay, well, yeah, just I mean, the Liminal Collective is one of the many spin-offs of one of these Lady Gaga gurus, Fernando Garibay. The Liminal Collective, as such, is not influencing the pop music stuff so much. That's another spin-off. Okay. But for the guru behind these, the Garibay Institute, which is like the cultural creating this new legion of, creative cultural workers in like the post, the AI, dominated world where, you hear this in the World Economic Forum as well, like innovation will be key, creativity will be key. And it gets pretty dark and weird, and there's so many contradictions, but just I think context is important, right? We're talking about culture, we're talking about these things. It's all in context. And sometimes we just need to zoom out and then things fall into place. But there's this idea of transcending your limits, of becoming fully self-actualized. We've all seen this in the culture. Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, fame. We all know, everybody's taught that in like marketing, economics, and all these things. He was one of the guys that pioneered over at Gosselin the idea of like peak performance and like creating fully self-actualized human beings. And so you have to remove all the limits, right? All the things that stand in your way of becoming your fully self-actualized self. And so you see this in the culture. You see this with these things like World Economic Forum, where because most people will be rendered useless by AI and robots, we are told, only the most creative, right? Only those who are able to strive beyond everybody else, right? And be like superhumans are really the ones who are going to thrive. And so if you want to thrive, you have to self-actualize and do all this stuff. And you see this, I mean, it's in the music, it's in the culture. This is deep in the psyche, like we can all get caught in it as well. Like we know times are getting crazy. And so you got to like make it, you got to do everything you can to sort of get ahead. And so we lose a sense of history, our community, right? The context in which like, well, why are we striving? Like, what is it that we're actually desiring to do? Like, what is good for humanity? Or can we be of service to that? Or are we trying to just make ourselves useful to a Borg cube, right? The modern World Economic Forum Borg cube that just wants to assimilate everything, and everybody like talks really nice with their hands and says like all these nice things about narratives and like innovation, but then it's like, well, their policies have been the thing that have killed creativity and innovation that's happening for decades. When the Western world was the most industrialized and technologically advanced, with countless new discoveries and spin-off technologies, that was creativity too, but they don't seem to like that, right? So it's weird.
Yeah. And Paul Robeson once made the point, speaking to the resistance against Franco's fascists of Spain, that the artist has to make a choice. The artist and the scientist have to make a choice of whether they submit themselves to freedom or slavery. To what cause do they devote themselves? Knowing that the creative people who have tapped into creativity as an identity will have now a choice to make. It's still contingent on whether that is going to be deployed towards destructive or constructive ends that are tied to or against natural law. But this brings up the occult, and it gets pretty messed up when you start scratching the way you are behind the surface of things and looking at who is influencing the influencers. And you start seeing that not only do you have those World Economic Forum connected ideologues who seem to have no belief in morality as a tempering process of our creativity. They don't believe in that. They believe, if anything, that morality is a destructive thing that hurts our creativity, that we should free ourselves of ideas of good and bad. But you have people like Maria Abramovich, who's also a guru of people like Lady Gaga, which gets us into some weird spirit cooking occultism behind the scenes too. Is this guy, what's his name? Garibay? Also interfacing, is he connected in any way to Abramovich? And whether he is or isn't, what the hell is Abramovich doing advising Lady Gaga? What sorts of lessons is she taking these artists into?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's clear that, we've seen this. There's a lot of these, there was the whole thing with Kanye West, and like he was raving about this guy, Gary Pasternak, who was like a coach, motivation coach in Hollywood. And you see like all the stars, like huge, like this guy's overseeing. And, then you see other interviews where it's like he's talking about the research on drugs that he would do for the Canadian military, and obviously one of the interviewers asked him an example of the kind of, like what, and he said he couldn't really say, but he gave one example of like something modafinil keeps, you could be a soldier and be up for like 3 days, and modafinil, you're fine. But he left it at that, right? But so, okay, these are celebrity kind of coaches and gurus. And you always, when you lift the veil a bit, you do research for, new drugs for the Canadian military. Cool. Or, Abramovich, you sort of interface with all like the, DNC, John Podesta, and like handlers, controllers of the, the Democratic sort of Washington deep state apparatus. And so, I mean, it's a small world, I guess, first off. And yeah, I mean, the discovery or realization that I came to, and I mean, this isn't new, if people hear that a lot of modern entertainment and stuff is manufactured, there's a certain fakeness to it. There's talented people, but then they're given personas, right? They're given lyrics, they're given songs. And that's what Garibay, who is one of the mentors of Gaga, he says, I'm a mirror. I show you your best self because your brain can't see your own best self. So I'm here to show you. So obviously you can imagine what that looks like if you're working with artists and these are big deals, let's say for aspiring artists. You got to play ball. He was an executive for Interscope Records, which is like one of the big ones, Garibay. So Abramovich as well, she's a spiritual sort of guru. Everybody has a sort of spiritual yearning, right? If you either, especially if you go high up, if your basic needs are met, will allow that whole Maslowian sort of, you don't have to worry about survival and all these things. You're going to start to be like, hey, what else is there? But then you find out at these high levels, Lady Gaga, it's like 500 million people to see a video. This is so managed at a level that's hard to fathom, right? And so at a certain level, I can sympathize, right? Like God only knows what these people are constantly bombarded with, and you're so high up and isolated from, just everyday life and people that one can imagine it would be easy to get lost if you're not really anchored and you haven't done a lot of work before finding yourself in these kind of, wild, hard to imagine situations. And that's where the bad guys come in, right? You're confused, and how do you manage this? You got like 10 people who are there to tell you how you're going to do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to think that what we're showing on the top 10 charts, pop music charts or whatever, is just a natural consequence of people just wanting to showcase their creativity is the height of naivete in a world where Marina Abramovich, I can't pronounce her name, is in charge of Ukraine's child safety system as ambassador for child safety. There's something wrong. This woman who has openly been really, really pushing occultism for many, many years. And then you see things like what you sent me just the other day, Lady Gaga's new music video of Judas, which has some catchy... it's an older one, right? It's an older video. But I mean, this is a revival of the Gnostic Gospels, of the Gospel of Judas, of... where she literally has such remarks as Jesus is my virtue, but Judas is my demon that I love, with really violent psychological imagery within it of the Madonna horror archetype that she's sort of playing into, a whole bunch of things that are part of what we can know if we've looked at our political history a little bit, of a intentional revival of Gnostic pre-Nicene Christianity, which were really just cults of Mithra, Cybele masquerading as demonic cults, as pseudo-Christian movements to infiltrate and destroy Christianity from within, that they're trying to revive right now to try to sort of paint the idea of the pure, real Jesus as the Bacchanalian, Dionysian Jesus of drugs and rock and roll. That's the real Jesus that has been obscured from us that we have to recapture, which also was the image painted for the baby boomers. Now, this is already a few generations ago that we saw this Luciferian connection to the musical movement that was brought into the Woodstock generation that has reverberations a couple of generations later in what we're seeing with Lady Gaga. You've written a little bit about this as well in that same paper that I was referencing. Could you expand? Is this just the paranoid freakouts of housewives of the 50s saying my kid is getting brainwashed by Satanism in rock and roll, or is there actually something to Luciferianism within the rock and roll movement?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a rabbit hole. At the same time, a lot of it is quite obvious, but I think because, there was a lot of chaos there from the 1960s until now, the amount of psychological operations, right, military operations and things just so overwhelming. There was an idea of wanting to escape, right, at one level. And there was obviously before the 1960s paradigm, there was a sort of like encrusted cultural Christianity, but it's not like, it was that for most people, it was the culture, right? That was your tribe. And so the way Luciferianism, I'd say, is really managed to get in there, and it almost sounds, the way it can sound appealing almost, is it's really about liberation, right? So like for the Luciferian ethos, basically everything went downhill after archaic Greece, right? With the introduction of classical Greek philosophy, Platonism, Christianity, where there was a split in man. There was this new duality between like good and evil, and all these philosophical and moral abstractions that now these people are sort of like, you have to do this. You want to, people are going to impose their will and get you to do what they want. And so the Luciferian ethos is, they're the tyrants, right? They're the ones who are really oppressing people. But then there's some truth to that at some level, but that's kind of why it can be appealing. It's a Trojan horse, because you use that because you're trying to get something in, right? You're trying to get something new and into the culture. So you're going to play on whatever, imperfections or problems there might be on society, and you sort of use that as your in. But yeah, there's the idea, if you read like The Food of the Gods, Terence McKenna, popularizer of all the psychedelic culture in the 1960s with Lyre, basically humanity was like really happy in like archaic Greece. And the reason nobody's been happy now for like 2000 plus years is because of like classical Greece and Christianity, where people got stuck in their heads and they're just these divided selves. That's R.D. Laing, the famous psychiatrist. Angels and demons.
And he was Tavistockian too, right? He was affiliated with London's Tavistock. Yeah. Yeah.
So the whole Luciferian is, we're going to liberate mankind from this oppression, this duality and splitness, where you can become whole, right? And you can experience all your feelings, and you don't have to feel shame, right? You don't have to feel all these bad things that at one level it's true, right? You can see psychologically people who feel a lot of shame, actually they do things they don't like all the time. And it's just a cycle, right? You get shame, you feel bad about yourself, there's a part of yourself that you hate, right? So there's these endless cycles. So you see that if you get into the whole, the mental health world that has been taken over and all the psyops, there's this idea of liberation, altered states, right? Like drugs are the thing that allow us to tap into all these different dimensions of reality, drug-infused mysticism. And so that's their in. Like, don't you want to experience something like divine? Haven't you ever experienced like true ecstasy? No, you haven't, have you? And so there's your pitch for the psychedelics and all these things. You're going to free yourself and Find your true
Yeah,
self.
they know that everybody here who's living in a nihilistic consumer society that's going nowhere obviously has a giant hole in their heart that they crave being fulfilled with something immortal, divine, eternal. That's a hunger. So what better way to fill it, or to give people a false fulfillment of it, but by offering them the idea that, hey, these psychedelics, DMT and psilocybin and LSD and whatever else, this is going to give you access to that spiritual component that you've been lacking, and people are just inclined to then eat it up.
Yeah, and then it's like we can even zoom out more, like, oh, CIA was like running all these programs to like spread all these things, so even to just sometimes take a healthy kind of sober distance, even if some of these things like appeal to us or whatnot. The way I see it, like, we don't want to lie to ourselves, right? We don't want to, like, we all have illusions or things we like, but I don't need to go to McDonald's and say like it's good for me, like have McDonald's, have a cookie, but don't like start telling yourself that one cigarette a day keeps the doctor away, or these kind of things. But you see with culture, people like things, and you can tell there's something there, because if you critique art or you critique culture, people get really aggressive. They get really like, they get super aggressive because it's part of their identity, right? And you see that's why there's this recoil and like this pushback, which you won't get like if you say like McDonald's is bad for you, but you'll be annoying. And I mean, yeah, it would be annoying to, but that's not how we want to do this, right? Like that's the thing. We all culture, we connect for different reasons, but if we zoom out, we just want awareness. Like we want to be able to see the big picture, and where do we fall in that? Like our long story short, I would say, how do I think about it? Every time we remove an illusion about ourselves, the world, and other people, we move closer to the divine, closer to God, closer to the real thing, and to our deeper selves. So we shouldn't be afraid.
That's a very good parting word before our last commercial break for this show, this segment. We're going to come right back on Connecting the Dots, TNTRadio.live for more.
With his expert analysis and opinion, this is TNT Radio's Timothy Shea.
Swatting is one of the most deadly hoaxes one can perpetrate. It should be considered a terroristic threat, much like calling in a bomb hoax. And it's lethal potentially not only for the residents, but also for the SWAT team that responds to the call, which typically is that someone just shot his wife, or someone's in the middle of raping someone, etc. Some heinous crime that requires a visit from SWAT. And yet, it's become the preferred political weapon of those on the left. Over the Christmas holidays, several politicians, including my own representative Brandon Williams here in New York 22, were swatted. But did we hear about any of the GOP politicians, Rick Scott, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Brandon Williams, others, being swatted? No. The only swatting we heard about was that of Boston Communist Mayor Michelle Wu. Now, I don't agree that Wu shouldn't have been swatted. I think it's heinous no matter who the victim is. However, why does the media only cover a swatting when it's a Democrat victim? Why don't they ever cover it when it's Republicans on the receiving end? From MAGAInstitute.com, this is Timothy Shea for TNT Radio.
Military families often sacrifice precious time away from loved ones while serving our country. And for those with children, the separation can be especially difficult.
We were worried that with him leaving, that she would lose those connections with her dad.
Some of life's best moments happen between parents, children, and the pages of a good book. United Through Reading provides that connection.
You can watch your mom or dad read a book to you, and it almost feels like they're really there.
We ensure they remain a consistent, meaningful part of their children's lives, no matter the distance.
Just seeing Jacob recognize Daddy again after a long time just melted my heart.
And now, as we're facing greater isolation from our loved ones, United Through Reading is also available to veterans. Learn more about United Through Reading and download our free secure app at unitedthroughreading.org.
Deconstructing psyops, propaganda, and mainstream media garbage. Connecting the dots. You're with Matt Arrett and Connecting the Dots on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Back in 1932 or 33, Aldous Huxley wrote what many are told was a warning in a book, pseudo-fiction called Brave New World, which if people read his later Brave New World Revisited something like 12, 13 years later, they would find out that no, it actually was not a warning. He's describing how soma, these hypersensualizing drugs to pacify the human herd within his caste system of test tube babies world of the future that came about after some great conflagration of nuclear war or something, some terrible, unspeakable hellishness, whereby in the wake of this alchemical chaos, a world government was then crafted. He says LSD is actually doing a better job than I ever imagined my soma could at doing the same effect or getting the same effects as I imagined it must. And this is a guy who, again, is sold to many people as being a great social commentator warning about the future and not actually giving any guidance of how this would happen. But at the same time, he also described how in the concentration camp of the mind, speaking, I guess it was to Berkeley, students of Berkeley, right? His famous Ultimate Revolution speech, that we will have a concentration camp without tears with the mind drugs of the future, whereby people will be in their little concentration camp of their mental electric fence, but they'll love their shackles and they will fight and die to defend their shackles of pleasure, of drugs, of other type of sensual experiences that they would be told is their freedom, rather than look for true freedom. And he's a guy who is recruiting Timothy Leary, who you already cited. He was a guy working with some very interesting and very, very dark forces that were big movers and shakers of our culture. And in your works, especially the Meet the Artists Behind the Artists, you get at the consequences of some of these political operations in social engineering that were tied to Huxley and Leary in the form of Laurel Canyon. And some of the big names that became almost like cultural godheads, Jim Morrison, others. Could you say something about how there was something much more military intelligence, much more dark behind the organic evolution of the so-called organic evolution of these figures, and who were some of the more interesting stars of the 60s that we should probably think more critically about?
Yeah, I mean, it's also another fun and deep rabbit hole. Yeah, weird scenes from the canyon by Dave McGowan. That's definitely a great book worth reading. I mean, there's so many anomalies, but basically he just points out that, yeah, like number one, San Francisco wasn't really wasn't the start of the hippie scene. It was really Laurel Canyon, which has sort of been almost written out. Like there's this official story, but then when you look at the real story, it started somewhere completely different. There's a secret military, laboratory Lookout Mountain, which is also a film studio, huge, overlooking the whole canyon. And he just keeps finding these anomalies in the people that are involved in, like, how did all these artists that, he talks about the Mamas and the Papas, he talks about Jim Morrison, the Doors, they were all in different parts of the country and somehow all found themselves in this canyon that didn't have anything going on at the time. So like all the clubs and things that were told, like, yeah, they all got their start at these clubs. Like these things popped up overnight, essentially. And why would people be going if they want to like start a band and get big to a place that didn't really have anything going on? And then from one day to the next, you have these clubs, you have the Young Turks, actors, from the movie The Shining, and bad now, Nicholas, what's his name? A lot of big actors. They were all fixtures in these clubs.
Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, I bugged there. So you had all these actors that were placed in the clubs. Obviously, it's run by like organized crime and blah blah blah. So you have this culture that came together really quickly, and he just keeps peeling, you keep, peeling the layers of the onion. Jim Morrison, I mean, all the songs that he wrote for like the first few albums, he had them written before he met the band or anything. And he didn't write anything else. He wrote like his weird poetry stuff, but it was nothing like the music of the Doors. And lo and behold, Jim Morrison was the son of a very high level Navy admiral who oversaw the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which is known as, one of these, like one of the most infamous false flags. It allowed for the Vietnam War to sort of really blow up. But as McGowan points out, it wasn't even a false flag, because false flag assumes that like something happened that was used, but nothing happened. He was saying it was just purely fabricated. But he just points out that most of the artists in this Laurel Canyon scene, the Mamas and the Papas, they're all Frank Zappa. Edgewood, his father works at Edgewood Arsenal. He's a chemical weapons expert with top clearance security. Mamas and the Papas, Phillips, the main guy, also comes from another high level military family, and he just goes on. The Nash and Young and Stills, Crosby, Stills. I mean, this is one of the old blue blood Dutch, kind of aristocratic.
The Rensselaer family.
Yeah, like the really old. He's like, and McGowan says, if you look up these names, like you'll see this is way above the people that we see on TV that we think have power. No, there's something more. And it's interesting in the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young case, even if you look it up, like how did the band get together? Everybody has a different account. Like nobody actually can tell you how it came together. Everybody has a different story. And that seems weirder, but when you look at when you zoom out and you see, well, yeah, it's because a lot of these things were brought together. The Byrds was another one. So he goes through, people today have no problem saying, yeah, a lot of like these pop acts, it's fake, it's manufactured. And back then people would be fine. Like, yeah, the Monkees, totally like just a fake TV band and whatnot. But same thing with these other bands. When you look into it, it doesn't mean they didn't have talent. Lady Gaga has talent, right? These people do have talent. The Weeknd has talent, but yeah, there's something else there that's weaving its magic, right? It's all about creating magic, creating a spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. I think it gets interesting once we dig into it. And again, every time we remove an illusion about ourselves, the world, others, we do move closer to truth, closer to real thing. And that feeling of freedom when we're, ripped away from illusions, from things we like, I think then we start to, people want to have a rush and sense of the divine or a transcendent experience. Well, break away from your illusions. I mean, Schiller about that as well. That's the sublime in art.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, well said. And I mean, it's something that's intelligible. It's not something that's just up for shadowy conspiracy theorizing. You can actually prove everything you've just said as far as the military intelligence connections, very high level families tied to very, very high up military intelligence. Jim Morrison's father being responsible for the non-incident that was cooked up to get us into the Vietnam War as a pseudo inside job, Gulf of Tonkin. That's Jim Morrison's father overseeing that operation. That's not a little thing that completely changed the course of world history. And then if you look at things like the very philosophy where Morrison said, I'm not interested in anything about revolt. I'm interested in anything about revolt, disorder, chaos, especially activity that appears to have no meaning. This is verbatim Crowley. Like, this is the point of what Crowley also said was the purpose of art is to destroy any sense of purposefulness, any sense of meaningfulness. And this is Jim Morrison saying, the great poet, philosopher, who dies, 29 or something. God knows what kind of proto-Harvey Pasternak experience that he was put through in that weird year where he went from a clean-cut strange kid to becoming this fully fledged uh musician. I think you read some of the writings glorifying serial killers like This Is the End. Read the lyrics. I don't know what happened. That was money well spent, that's for sure, as far as creating him. But it was not a naturally or organically evolving thing, for sure. And then also you got the Stones, right? Sympathy for the Devil. And the whole idea of do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. This became like live in the moment, right? Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law is Thelema of Crowley, which you see Jay-Z, modern pop singers. You have Jimmy Page, who's the biggest, the lead singer for Led Zeppelin, who's the biggest Crowley fan and collector of Crowley paraphernalia, who's a big cultural mover and shaker and leading people, like I said, around Jay-Z, wearing Do What Thou Wilt paraphernalia and Beyonce. Very disturbing to think about what was really behind the thing that we were told was our culture. Yeah. But then what do you do for like a counterpoint? What is a more healthy example of like culture with substance that the oligarchy is afraid of? What type of expressions of music, of culture has the oligarchy been afraid would become, I guess you could say, the dominant force of the world?
Yeah, I mean, well, the reality is Western classical culture. I mean, we have such a rich tradition. I mean, there's so many, it almost becomes, it's not cliche, but like Beethoven, Schiller, Shakespeare, the class, Prometheus, right? Aeschylus's Prometheus and all these tragedies, the ones that have survived. I mean, there's so much timeless wisdom, right? And I think part of that is also getting excited about the idea of seeing a revival and rebirth of these ideas today. They always end up coming back, right? What was the Renaissance? The
rebirth, right?
Rebirth out of like medieval, crusading vampire cult run feudal Europe. Like that's not supposed to be possible. Christianity, this humble movement emerging out of, the fires of like Rome and it's like countless death cults, it's almost unimaginable to fathom that such things could have happened. But yet we actually have a tradition of that in Western culture, of sort of emerging from these dark ages. And I mean, it's been done many times before. And you see that, artists are often at the helm because they have vision, right? They have imagination, so they can envision something different than what we've all been kind of primed with, and not be afraid to, play around and imagine something different than just, falling in line, no matter what those arbitrary rules and laws are. So imagination is a sacred thing if used properly. And so whether it's, Aeschylus, we should all just go home and read Aeschylus if we haven't. Schiller, who's barely known in the English speaking world other than like as a name, who's like the Shakespeare of Germany. But I mean, it's especially when we see that there are writers today, like as an editor, I see that there's people writing that are really, really good. Their stuff is truly inspiring and gives us that experience of that idea of wanting to tap into the divine, right? There's a divine spark in all of us. And a lot of these people are the great works just remind us that it's in everybody, right? I think that's the key. So when we speak with other people, we want to get to a place where we can see that spark in them, even when they can, right? I think that's really the Christian the beauty of Christianity, right, is even when people don't, or even when they're at their lowest, we have to be able to see it. If we can truly see, then it's there and you want to speak to it. Also, the beauty of it is that, I mean, God allowed the snake into the garden, right? Like people go their own way. We're making choices, and people have a choice. So we all have a choice right now, and that is a discovery, I think, that we all want to make. Free will is, I mean, it's a big discovery.
Yeah, it's so much better than the Gnostic idea that God created evil because evil is thus necessary, and that would imply that something of the creator flowed through creation, since, you know, the cause must flow into the effect, meaning God must thus have participated in direct evil. Evil must be the consequence of an evil God. In that case, you got a whole different cosmology where we're all made in the image of something evil, and thus to be natural means to be accept and to do and maybe even grow to love a passion for evil, which is very scary to think what type of destruction of natural potential emerges. So Dave, I mean, what you've done with your new Lyre, Chained Muse, people should subscribe, get the paid upgrade to your Age of the Muses on Substack. How else can they reach you if they want to submit writings or just follow your work?
Reach out at Age of Muses. You'll find our magazine there, our print publication, and everything we're producing. We kind of bring it all together there. Age of Muses on Substack.
Age of Muse on Substack, The Chained Muse as well. Great website. David, thank you so much for taking the time to join me and talk about these very important ideas. I hope to have you back on. This has been Connecting the Dots on TNT Radio, and we'll tune in next week.